Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya Benazzo.
We are we are here from the unceded territory of the Miwok and South Pomo Indians, and called colonially called, and in the now in the colonial name of this area is Sebastopol, California.
And welcome. This is the 6th day of the film release where Olive Trees Weep. So we've been gathering now every day, inviting guests from poets to journalists to filmmakers, artists, to expand on the themes we cover in the film and continue learn together and educate. To many of us in the West have been really victims of what to say, like we haven't had access. We could have read and learned, but for many years, for many of us, we didn't know the depth of what was happening in Palestine. And that was one of our wishes with the film for those of us who didn't know about the decades of occupation, of apartheid happening in Palestine, to educate the Western audience so we can all make an informed stand and stand for justice, for freedom, for equal rights, for Palestinian, but also for humanity. And with the film, we felt that Palestinian people have been so dehumanized through our Western media that with the film, we hope to share the human stories that are universal stories, actually, and to touch the hearts of the viewer and understand that all lives are sacred,
Yes.
all human life is sacred, and may we all stand together in that deep knowing. So today, actually, conversation is very much about why so much disinformation in the West about what's happening. And we have some incredible journalists with us and writers and thinkers to help us understand the background of what we are beginning to understand today. Of course, many of you have known already for many, many years, but for those of us who are just starting to see behind the veil and starting to look at the reality. So
Yes.
from occupied lands to occupied narratives, unpacking media discrimination. And our guests today are...
I'm going to read some bios, so we introduce you to our guest, Tareq Hajjaj. Tareq is an author and member of the Palestinian Writers Union. He studied English literature at Al-Azhar University in Gaza. Currently a Gaza correspondent for Mondo Vice, is a writer based in the Gaza Strip. He writes as an eyewitness to the next generation to let them know how we survived. Thank you, Tareq, for being here. Thank you. Then we have Adel Iskandar. Adel is a prominent media scholar and associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He is known for his critical analysis of how Western media frames shape perception of the Arab world, often perpetuating stereotypes and misunderstandings. Thank you, Adel, for being here. Then we have Robert Inlakesh. Robert is a political analyst, journalist, and documentary filmmaker currently working for Mint Press News. He has reported from and lived in the occupied Palestinian territory and has worked with the likes of RT, Middle East Eye, The New Arab, Memo, Mondo Vice, Al Majadin English, TRT World, and various other media outlets. Thank you, Robert, from here. We also have Maral. Maral, are you here?
Maral is with us.
Maral Quttieneh is a Palestinian journalist and producer from Jerusalem, raised and educated in Palestine, continued her master's degree in France, and returned back to Palestine in 2007. Since then, she has worked with different media outlets in radio, TV, and written press. And she was also helping us in the making of the
Maral
movie.
was our location producer.
And it is such a joy to see her again, if we see her. But at least we know she's here with us.
She's here. Let's see if we can spotlight her, Sarah. Okay. Okay, let's move on. And when Maral is here, we can bring her on. Well, let's begin with a story that happened recently. Not a story, it's a massacre. The Nuseirat massacre that Tareq, you wrote such a heartbreaking piece, such a incredible report. And in this day raid, Israel killed 274 Palestinians, including 64 children, 57 women, and injured, I think, over 700 in total. They rescued 4 hostages, and I believe they killed 3, which we don't even know or hear about at all. And I just wanted to read some of the headlines we had that day. CNN, Israel rescues 4 hostages in operation. Palestinian officials say killed more than 100 people. Reuters, Israel rescues 4 hostages in Gaza. Hamas says 210 Palestinians killed in Israeli assault. Israel-Hamas war day 246, this is Haaretz. Netanyahu Gaza operation heroic. All hostages to return one way or another, Israel. And Al Jazeera, death toll from Israel attack on Gaza, Nazareth refugee camp rises to 210. They just of the day of. And then Tareq, your title, I heard all my friends' last breath. Testimonies from Nazareth massacre. Maybe we'll start with you, Tareq. I'm sure this is nothing new. This has been forever the misrepresentation of the story in Western media. But maybe you can just speak for you personally. What was it to receive the news and to have to write this piece?
Thank you so much. And let me please start with the story you just mentioned about that man who witnessed all the 5 of his friends dying above him while all of them are carrying out on a place like a small place, just stuff above each other, going to the nearest hospital to be treated and to have medical care. But in the road, as the witness just said, and I wrote in my story, he heard them dying one by another until they reached that hospital. And those who didn't die in the road, they just passed away in the hospital. So all of his friends just died in front of him. That man was helping families who got their homes destroyed and bombed in a Nuseirat refugee camp. The story began when the Israeli troops just started their operation in a Nuseirat refugee camp to release or to return 4 Israeli captives in the Gaza Strip, regardless the massive number of civilians who just killed on the streets. And as I heard from people there on the ground, they say that the Israeli troops and the US troops and soldiers who invaded a Nuseirat refugee camp were shooting at people, ordinary people on the street while they during their way from the point of start this operation until they reached that building. They got their captives inside. So they just shoot anyone on their street, on their road to that place. I heard women just say that they did not even look at who's are shooting at, no matter a child, a woman, uh, an elderly people, a young man. They didn't even like distinguish between someone holding a gun as a fighter or someone just crossing the street, because the operation area was the most crowded area in Anusharat refugee camp. It's the market of the complete camp. And everyone goes daily to that place to get his family needs, to get anything they can find in the market. So it is a really crowded place. And everything just happened suddenly, without any warning, without anything to let innocent people just go away from the land that should fighting on it. But no, the troops just invaded, and they use Palestinian costumes, Palestinians cars, Palestinians vehicles, and they also, the American and the Israeli troops, according to people who were there, they got in their cars some belongings. So they were trying to put themselves as Palestinian displaced families. They did the exact things that the Palestinian families inside Gaza Strip, when they move from one place to another, they got a car, they got the stuff with their belongings, blankets, everything they have. So they did so to enter the refugee camp. And when the Palestinian resistance in Gaza figured out about them, the clashes and the bombing and where the war plans, the shelling, everything was just firing at that place. So that massive number of Palestinians innocent who got killed, and that massive number of homes that destroyed also on their, while people inside it, they couldn't just run away. I mean, I have so much details and stories I just heard from the ground about this massacre. I heard a family was walking on the street during the operation. And the bombing was massively and randomly. So in any place you could have a bomb, and you couldn't move anymore. So a family of three was walking on the market, and a bomb just dropped near the family. The father immediately killed, and not only killed, just like torn apart from the bomb. The three members of the family fall down, and then after some seconds they woke up again. The mother saw her husband killed, and she and her daughter survived. So she just took her daughter and keep walking, left behind the dead husband, just because of the massive bombing they received and how they act when they surrounded by fires and troops running away in every place, shooting everyone and everybody get down on the ground, trying to understand what's going on. We are in the market. We are not in a fighting place. This is a safe place according to the Israeli army, and so on. Stories just flowing and flowing.
Oh, Adele and Robert, I'd like to hear from you as well. I know because you've worked in that field for so long. Maybe Adele, you can speak to why Western media wouldn't even call it a massacre. Why would they present it like it's two sides that are armed and fighting, and this is just a byproduct of a war? Why so much misinterpretation?
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Robert. You go ahead. As a journalist, it's probably best that you go.
I was completely. If you want to go first, you had something prepared. I think. Yeah. No.
Robert.
Okay. I'll answer. Apologies for that. I think I misunderstood for a moment. So I'd say that breaking down media bias in the West specifically, there's a number of factors that you have to look at. Obviously, you have pressure groups, you have the Israel lobby, which is present in the United States. Then you have individuals who work within media agencies who tend to self-censor, who have political views that are aligned with Israel. If you really want to have a good representation of why there are such lies, look back to the reporting that was done in the Western media in 2018, which started on March the 30th. When the Great Return March occurred, there was basically nothing. It was very minimal. It wasn't a major story. When it was mentioned, we heard that Israeli soldiers who were shooting unarmed people across a fence from hundreds of meters away, none of which had been killed or seriously injured throughout over a year of protests, were defending themselves. And we heard things like, for instance, that there was a border between the Gaza Strip and Israel, when no such legally defined border exists. Yet we still heard that Israel was defending itself. We still heard the same narratives about Palestinian so-called terrorism. And the bias was implicit in every single article that was written on this issue. This time that we see there's major news coverage of it, I would argue because the Israelis have suffered blows. And so because the Israelis have suffered a blow, and this happens during every single war when rockets are coming over, the Israelis are under fire now. So it's a major story that can't be ignored in the Western media. And I believe that this bias that exists within the Western media is rooted in quite a bit of racism. That's a large aspect to it, and a lack of care for the victims in this scenario. And I'd say that there's a reason why we don't hear of other conflicts, like what's happening in Sudan right now or the Congo. We don't hear about that because there's not a white settler population there that is being harmed in some way, resisting by the resistance, the local resistance. But if you want to put it down to local pressure, I think the Israel lobby is extremely effective at doing its job. Pressuring people, writing notes. As well, a lot of people know that if they want connections in the intelligence community, if they're working for certain news outlets, they'll lose those connections if they say certain things which don't go along with the State Department's talking points and whatever information they're presented. So I think this is multifaceted as to why exactly the media is covering what is occurring, which is a genocide in Gaza in the way that it is. I don't think it's down to one issue. However, some may be contributing more than others. So that's sort of the overview. And I'll pass on the mic.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think you you pretty much covered a lot of those really critical points. I appreciate you laying it down with such clarity. As an academic, we tend to be a little bit kind of verbose and conceptual. So you really sort of gave us the nuts and bolts. I think just to try and add a few layers to this, I would say that one of the big reasons behind what has happened here is precisely what Robert described, but in a very sustained way. We have to think about this as a perennial problem. This is something that's been going on for year after year after year, decades, in fact, of sustained mass production of propagandistic information, not just about Palestinians, who have actually effectively become completely erased from Western media narratives. So Palestinians actually don't exist. They are, in fact, replaced by perpetrators. So, for example, it's harder for a Western news media organization to say the word Palestine or Palestinians than it is to say the word Hamas. That's why you see those two being literally replaced with each other. Once you use the word Hamas, then they become justified, then there's justification for targeting because it falls under the legal definition in the United States and many parts of Western Europe, where Hamas is considered legally as a terrorist organization. So if every Palestinian becomes Hamas, then therefore they are not bestowed with the same level of humanity and sympathy that one would level to any population anywhere. So the erasure of Palestinians and Palestine is a systematic project. And also, in addition to that, it is imbued with a lot of really active propagandizing that is designed to subsume anything related to Palestinian liberation and Palestinian existence with radical Islamism, right? And this is the compartmentalization that makes it impossible for editors, journalists to make sense of what it is that they're seeing. So they're witnessing all of this footage and content coming out of Gaza, which is absolutely genocidal, but then they're being told not to believe their eyes and ears, that somehow this is being manufactured or is being, it's fraudulent, and to instead listen to the non-racialized, Israeli spokespersons who look and resemble, the mainstream employees within these media establishments, and of course, who speak English with the same level, with the same kind of acuity, and because of course, there's an active infiltration of public knowledge. One thing that I think we typically miss is the role that Hollywood and film production plays. For example, over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a huge influx of Israeli film and television series that are now on these major streaming platforms like Netflix and others that are literally enacting or performing precisely the kind of operation that Israel did in the massacre of the last few days. So, for example, When Heroes Fly, Fauda, some of you will remember these, this Perfect Spies, The Spy, The Good Cop. I mean, the list goes on. There's so many of them. Israel mass produces a lot of this, and the production value is extremely high. And when broadcast and made available to Western audiences, it creates the assumption that Israeli life is infinitely more valuable, and that anything that the IDF or Israeli, occupation forces do to rescue Israeli life is worthwhile. Now, of course, keep in mind that, whether it's Muslims or Arabs or Palestinians, they have been designed to die and be killed in mass in Hollywood. There's substantial research done on that from like the 1930s onwards. I would encourage those of you who might be interested to look at the work of Professor Jack Shaheen, a very famous book called Real Bad Arabs and various others, where essentially it's a deep dive and a content analysis of all Hollywood production and all depictions of Arabs, Muslims, and Middle Easterners for decades. Now that maps perfectly onto Israel's desire to represent not just Palestinians, but anyone in solidarity with them as an ally in this absolutely demonic, horrific kind of ideological group that is destined to destroy all of life. It's sort of an anti-humanitarian kind of group. And then, of course, just to kind of add really quickly to that there are kind of levels and layers of filtering and propaganda. For those who might be interested, I would encourage you to look at the work of Noam Chomsky on propaganda models and how propaganda models work. He talks about the various filters, right? Another incredible sort of Jewish public intellectual who unpacks how Western media manufactures consent so that everybody is agreeable and everybody's walking that same sort of line. And the last component of that, which is what Robert spoke to, is the role of flack, which is when journalists break the mold and decide to cover a story in a different way and the impact that has, right? The backlash, the huge backlash, the demonization, the challenging of all these things. Now, where we talk about the lobby extensively, right? AIPAC and others and their impact, and as far as the political arena, but what we often miss are the extensions of the lobby in organizations that they're described as nonprofits, but they're extremely well funded. And their role is to essentially skim and analyze every single report in the Western media about Israel, Palestine, and anything. If you're a journalist and you're critical of Israel, you become targeted. If a story is published in a newspaper or airs on one of the television networks, those networks get letters and they get scandalized, right? And this has been going on for years. One of them is called Camera. In Canada, we have another organization called Honest Reporting. And they've been doing this for many, many years. I would add to that there are similar organizations called MEMRI, for example, MEMRI, also supported by very staunch pro-Israeli and pro-Zionist groups, whose role has been to actually look at anything that is coming out of the Arab and Muslim world by way of media that might be problematic and foreground it, right? So just basically say all Arabs, all Muslims, all Middle Easterners are hell bent on the destruction of Western civilization. And here's a random person in the middle of nowhere who said that, basically effectively dehumanizing all 15 million Palestinians, dehumanizing all 1.5 billion Muslims in this world, and dehumanizing all 300 million Arabs and so on. But they're all basically one and the same. And by extension, anyone protesting in favor and in support of Palestinians in many cities across North America and Western Europe and around the world, that they are themselves brainwashed by, propaganda. So these are the two psychic worlds that we're living in. And the Western media have been producing and reproducing these narratives for much of the last 8.5 months, with a few exceptions as the pressure pushes against that. But this, in my opinion, are some of the perennial and long-standing problems that we face.
Well,
thank you. Thank you for this overview that gives a larger context to what we're seeing today. And Tareq, sorry, correct us, please. Tareq.
Yes.
Can you share with us about the reality of being a journalist in Gaza and you having to, I believe you moved 5 times, you fled 5 times within Gaza, and then eventually having to leave? Just to give us a taste of what it is to be a journalist under those circumstances. I think now more than 150 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of this cycle of violence, brutality.
Well, actually, maybe you can say it's one of the hardest jobs ever in the Gaza Strip, especially during this genocidal war. At the beginning, moving was like, look at this small, like, short story. I went someday from my place in Ash-Shujaiya neighborhood in Gaza City, east of Gaza City, to Ash-Shifa hospital in the west of Gaza City. I went there to interview some survivors. And it took me like 4 hours to go and get back. But when I get back, I found the place like changed. The building just got bombed during a long way in my going back to Ash-Shujaiya. That was in a Ramal area. While I was moving in that area in the car, every second means like you can get killed right now only because you're doing something. Just as Mr. Adel mentioned, the media and the power on the world do not want you to tell about the exact reality on the ground, how civilians getting killed, and how you just make their voices heard by telling their stories and speaking about their pain, speaking about their loss. So journalism, the exact working of journalism, because we need to go to the places and everywhere in Gaza, as long as you're moving under the Israeli drones and warplanes on the sky. So you are in critical danger. And of course, they can know some specific details because you know how Israel occupation controls everything on the ground in Gaza Strip. So they can know who is in this car and they can target it. So I was always afraid. And especially in Khan Yunis, when I was displaced for the 3rd time in Khan Yunis, I was hearing news that the Israeli war plan target journalists and their families inside their homes. So it became like an inside dialogue all over the time. If I am out, I maybe got killed alone. If I'm inside, I maybe got killed with all of my family. So both the choices like harder than each other, and I have to handle them. And to be honest, my work, I work in Monroe, as you just mentioned, and I'm really proud that I'm working with such an organization. They knew the situation in Gaza at the beginning of the war. They knew how the Israeli army target journalists, and they killed them and their families. And they told me, if you want to stop writing, if you want to just keep your family, save your family, you can do it. We are not putting pressure on you. And I am the one who decided to keep working because I can't just stop working in such an important time that the world really needs to understand and know the reality and the situation on the ground. I mean, I'm writing my stories based on normal people testimonies, on the crime scenes, on the places that Israeli army invade and targets and killed Palestinian in. So it is really hard to be a journalist there in Gaza. It is not only hard, it's like feeling all the time that your life is on the edge. And it's not only your life, you can also harm your family. So it's a job of challenging, and these feelings of fear about your family. I don't know if there's a job that someone can work out there or inside and feel that fear on his family that he may cause their death. So this is like a simple sentence, but explains much about how to be a journalist in Gaza, especially during this war, such war.